Well, hi, Jonathan. Thank you for joining me today. Today we are meeting with Jonathan Weinhagen. This is the very first interview with the Mooreover newsletter, and I'm very, very pleased to have this opportunity to talk with you today and learn about some of the interesting things that are happening in Minneapolis. I can't think of a better person to meet with than you with all of your experience. So welcome. Jonathan, if you could just spend 1 second spending a little bit of time talking about your role with the Minneapolis Regional Chamber of Commerce.
Sure thing, and thanks, Laura, for having me on. Excited for the conversation that we're going to have. I am Jonathan Weinhagen, President and CEO of the Minneapolis Regional Chamber. I've been in this role for a little over 4.5 years. Prior to that, I spent 7 years at the St. Paul Area Chamber. I left that organization as vice president overseeing public policy and economic development. I often remind people in the Minneapolis-St. Paul market that I'm bicoastal. I speak East and West Metro. So look forward to the discussion we're going to have here today. In my free time, I have 4 boys. My wife and I live in Shoreview, Minnesota, a suburb of St. Paul. I also moonlight as the school board chair of the Mounds View Public Schools, the 10th largest school district in our state. So lots of angles to cover here today, Laura.
Fantastic. Fantastic. You are very ingrained in our community, and I know that you'll shed some fantastic insight onto many of the questions today. Before I go too deep, if you could give a high-level description of what your job entails at the Regional Chamber.
Yes, the Minneapolis Regional Chamber, post-consolidation this past year, is now the largest chamber of commerce in the state of Minnesota. We represent 2,300 members across the metro area. And our work is really focused on advocacy and public policy, so creating a business climate and economy and city that works for everyone, that's attractive for business. Obviously, member services, so we want to provide a high level of engagement with our member communities, and then a level of support more broadly into the community. So as we think about community and economic development and making sure that this is a place where people want to live, work, and do business, and that's attractive and competitive against our peer set across the country. That's really the work. And I have an incredible team. I remind people all the time that powers that work. And we have been cranking along, and I would tell you these last 12 months in my decade of doing this work have been unprecedented as cliche, but couldn't be more true in this moment as we think about preparing for the economic recovery and thinking about supporting businesses and our region and cities through this pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I think businesses and the community of Minneapolis could not be more thrilled that you have an eye on this and that you are their advocate, because we are in challenging times, no question. But solutions, we need solutions. And without discussing these solutions, which is what you do on a daily basis, those ideas don't come forth. So I'll dive into some of our questions today. So we know that we're seeing a direct correlation between vaccinations and the reduced coronavirus cases impacting the Minneapolis economy. If you could comment on what initiatives Minneapolis Regional Chamber has implemented to further assist in reducing the unemployment rates and rebuild existing businesses that have been negatively impacted by the pandemic.
I'd start by acknowledging, and I think you framed this, there is light at the end of the tunnel. I remind people that we still have to go through the tunnel, but we are getting there and are absolutely headed in the right direction. This is being filmed on March 22nd. We just learned that yesterday was the first day in a long time that Minnesota had 0 COVID-19 deaths. So we are absolutely headed in the right direction with regards to this pandemic. The chamber's been working really hard alongside businesses and communities and leaders to think about, one, how do we support through the pandemic? And then more importantly, how do we respond to what we're really framing as dual pandemics and dual economic recoveries? We have the COVID-19 pandemic that has just absolutely devastated, businesses large and small. And then we have the pandemic of systemic racism and the death of George Floyd in our community and the civil unrest that impacted so many businesses. And that was really obviously precipitated by George Floyd's death, but a response to 400 to 500 years of structural, historical, and institutional racism. And it's important to note that that's the work, that's the gravity of the work that this region and our city is grappling with right now. So, I'll touch on three to four efforts that we've been engaged in over the course of the last year. Very early on in the pandemic, we launched a coalition effort called Too Local to Fail to provide a set of information and resources to small businesses to make sure that our local business community, the fabric of any economy, certainly here in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, had the necessary tools to weather what I think we all thought was going to be a couple weeks, maybe a couple months, and here we are a year later still managing through that. Late last year, after the CARES funding, so the first federal stimulus funding came in, we struck up a public-private partnership with Hennepin County and launched a platform called Elevate Business to bring technical assistance, peer-to-peer networking, and topical webinars to businesses across Hennepin County. We soft launched that program in November, in fact, the week of Thanksgiving, with a little bit of a moonshot goal to reach 500 companies on the platform by the end of the year, which I will tell you, I told my team seemed insane and like we were setting ourselves up for failure. At 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, we had 518 companies on the platform, 40% of them identified as being owned by people of color, 40% of them women-owned, and 50% of them receiving technical assistance. So this platform is and has been working. And then did an effort just a couple months ago called Open for Dining. So following the second kind of wave of really significant hard restaurant closures, if you recall, through the first of the year, when restaurants were able to reopen their doors, we hosted a digital billboard campaign to help highlight all of the great restaurants that were back open and making sure that people knew that this is something we've got to get out and support our local restaurants and restaurateurs.
Very creative. I'm sure the restaurants appreciated that. One question. So the program that was used to help people with working from home, I'm assuming that was really truly like getting them set up with devices and computers so they might be able to do the work from home. Is that a true statement that that's kind of what the program was instilled to do?
Yeah, multi-dimensional program, absolutely a piece of it. We know that our governor's order indicated that if you can work from home, you must work from home. So I want to know and recognize and honor the hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans who didn't have that opportunity, who were through this entire pandemic showing up to stock shelves and to provide a level of service across industries. But for a really significant portion of our economy, they did find themselves going from 5 days a week in an office to 5 days a week, not just working from home, but supporting kids in distance learning from home and all of the dynamics of that. So really making sure that we could equip people with all of the resources that they need to make that pivot.
So it was children as well. It's not
100%.
Just employers. Would you say that was a larger percentage? The children?
I think it was pretty balanced.
Okay.
All of these dynamics came into play, and as we talk to employers about how to prepare employees for a work from home environment, flexibility was kind of a key theme, and I think is going to continue to be a key theme as we look into the future. I mean, flexibility is the future, and responding to and meeting this pandemic, where it's at. And I've just been really impressed by the private sector, the public sector, and just individuals and how they've showed up over the course of the last month to respond to what none of us could have predicted.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, no, flexibility is definitely the way of the future in the workplace. Employers are definitely going to have to remain flexible to keep and retain their best talent. We know that. Absolutely. So if there's some specific companies that you've encountered over the last year that you've been really impressed by their demonstration of resiliency, if there's someone or an example that sticks to mind, I think that could be really interesting and insightful.
Laura, always danger zone when I start to pick favorites with regards to the business community. What I would tell you is I have been, remarkably impressed with the leadership in our business community over the course of the last 12 months. 1,500 businesses were impacted by the civil unrest that we talked about a minute ago in the aftermath of George Floyd's death. That is a whole group, as a cohort that has shown a level of resiliency, standing in front of their burned down, rubbled out buildings with a resilience and a desire and a resolve to rebuild. I couldn't point to anything more resilient. And then you look at specific examples. I think about Jack's Cafe in Northeast, kind of a landmark restaurant that has been closed and open and closed and open and continues every step of the way to figure out how to find a path forward and how to think about the future and their economic recovery. Houston White's Men's Room, a barbershop in North Minneapolis. In the midst of a pandemic, his pivot was into development. So just last Friday, they broke ground on an expansion where they're going to do executive housing focused on Black talent coming into our marketplace and build a coffee roastery right in the heart of North Minneapolis. Chowgirls Catering. They recognized that the event and catering business was going to be challenged, so they partnered with Second Harvest Heartland and started producing meals to serve people in need. And then you look at a venue like the Mall of America, who identified some challenges with businesses who were displaced by the civil unrest and created the community commons, where dozens of companies had the opportunity to reopen in kind of the epicenter of retail. And find a new beginning. So I think there's just countless examples of, not just businesses being resilient, but businesses stepping up to help each other in this marketplace. And it shouldn't surprise any of us because that's the most Minnesotan thing that any of us could ever do.
Absolutely. I like those examples. Those are fantastic. So if you could comment a little bit about how PPP funding has played a role in keeping Minnesota businesses afloat. I think that could be really insightful, and I'm sure you have some good information on that.
I mean, the Paycheck Protection Program was, absolutely a lifeline in the earliest days of the pandemic. So a couple of thoughts on that. One, I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge and give a shout out to our financial institution community, who was really saddled with, bringing online one of the largest new financial projects in our country's history, and in a matter of days. And it didn't happen without hiccups. And even as we look at the data and kind of the some of the inequity in it, it was really a heroic effort on behalf of our financial institution partners in this market and across the country. And it deployed billions of dollars directly to small businesses to help make sure that they could continue to pay their workers who were furloughed or unable to work as a result of stay-at-home orders. They were able to cover rents and utilities and other things. And the second phase of it, kind of as we've seen the sustained nature of this pandemic, is what I'll call a second shot in the arm, right? We're experiencing vaccinations. It's a two-shot approach. PPP has very much been that for the business community, and in particular, small Main Street businesses who, without it, I think we'd see even more devastation than we have.
Completely agreed. I know in the Business Journal just last week, there was an article that said basically there's much less bankruptcy than they anticipated. And that was a relief. And I know for certain that the payroll protection plan has had a significant role in that. So this is a near and dear topic to my heart, and it applies to attracting out-of-state businesses to move to Minnesota. For us to stay competitive throughout the country, we have to really let people know what's great about Minnesota. Clearly, we know that we have an educated workforce. That's really, really important for us. We know that we can do that, and we can promote that. But is there anything from a business standpoint that our viewers might like to know that could be relevant?
I think you're right. I mean, attracting talent and capital, and they both go hand in hand, is absolutely critical, and it's core to the work of the chamber and to other partners. So we work closely with GERD MSP, our Regional Economic Development Partnership, and Minnesota Deed to actively try to attract companies and promote the state of Minnesota, and in particular the Minneapolis-St.Paul marketplace, as a great place to live, work, and do business. We are in the midst of, as we've talked about for the last 15 minutes, a global pandemic. So that is creating some stressors. We also have kind of the double challenge of being the home to where George Floyd died, a global phenomenon. The headlines of our city burning were really kind of emblazoned into a lot of people's minds. The number one thing that I hear when I talk to companies, whether they're local and in our city today, or outside of our city and considering a move here, is related to the unrest that we experience, the future of public safety in our marketplace. So we have some work to do with regards to projecting not just the image, but the reality of what Minneapolis-St. Paul is. Now, I often remind people that we entered the global pandemic, nearing a decade of $1 billion in building permits in the city of Minneapolis. We had hosted a Super Bowl and a Final Four, and we were really a rising star with regards to places that people wanted to invest capital, places that people wanted to move to. I have every belief that we're going to get right back there, but there's absolutely work to do with regards to that. The other thing I'd be remiss in not saying is, while we sit at the top of many lists, right? In fact, most of my talking points can hit on a dozen lists where we're number one at this and top three at that. We also have some warts. We have some challenges as a marketplace. We boast some of the worst, if not the worst, academic disparities between white students and students of color. The worst income and wealth disparities in the nation. Over the course of the last decade, the income gap between people of color and our white population in our region, in Minneapolis-St.Paul, is only closed by about $600, $60 a year. So at the same time as we need to focus on attracting the next generation of talent and capital and opportunity, we also need to think about how do we solve for some of these really challenging disparities that are not new. We've been working on these for generations, but they've certainly been illuminated both through the pandemic, which is, again, disproportionately impacting people of color from an economic and public health standpoint, but also following George Floyd's death and understanding the continued challenges that we have around systemic racism in our city and region and across the country.
One would say that this might be a social correction, most certainly. To that point, Jonathan, would you say that a bigger crisis is our community's reaction to George Floyd or COVID?
I think that's a really interesting and right question. I think to some extent it depends on who you ask. We've done some survey and polling work that would pretty credibly suggest that all of the activity around George Floyd's death is a much more significant challenge for our marketplace than the actual pandemic. The other thing to remember is, and I won't say uniformly, but Boston and Austin and Dallas and Houston and San Francisco, they're all experiencing a global pandemic. So we love to think that we're special and unique, and we are as Minnesotans and Minneapolitans, and we're not that special when it comes to experiencing a global pandemic. So I think the compounding nature of George Floyd and the civil unrest and the conversation around public safety and policing is really core to our future and our economy's future.
Agreed. One thing that appears from some of the research I've done is that Minnesota's job creation has remained somewhat stagnant over the last few years, as far as new companies coming to Minnesota. Well, and I could say that to Minneapolis. So could you elaborate a little bit on what Minnesota could be doing better to increase local job opportunities?
Absolutely. So I think there's a lot of dynamics at play, as there always are. I spent the first decade of my career talking about a talent shortage. And you've all heard the numbers: 160,000, 180,000, 230,000 worker shortfall by 2030. So that's been the reality that we've been working against. So we entered the pandemic, really in a hunt for talent. So our inability to attract companies wasn't that we're not a great place, it's that we didn't have enough people to fuel talent. So unprecedentedly low unemployment. We're entering an economic recovery, still have some of those challenges. In fact, there are industries and chief human resources officers and CEOs that I talk to every day who are like, I got 1,200 job postings and we need people.
Yeah.
We also know that there are industries that have been completely eviscerated. So there's going to be a little bit of a recalibration with regards to the job market. There's also an opportunity to think about our regional economy and economic growth differently. I don't think we're ever going to let off the gas with regards to trying to attract the very best talent to this marketplace and continue to fuel what really is a headquarters community. You often hear the highest per capita Fortune 500s in the country. All of that and kind of the ancillary spill off of that has served us really well. And we've got a small business economy. Small businesses employ 47% of people in the Minneapolis-St.Paul marketplace, companies that employ less than 50 people. So really thinking about job creation in a different way. So we're going to certainly, again, not, stop trying to attract the next Fortune 500, which we've never done actually. Minnesota has always, we've incubated Fortune 500 companies. They've started here and grown here, but we'll want to continue to attract, corporate headquarters and think about how do we grow our small business ecosystem. I remind people all the time that if you have 10 people working for you today, you could have 20 people next year, and then 40, and then 80, and then 160. Imagine if we as a region, which we've never done before, really built a small business strategy where we thought about accessing capital and deploying that capital in a really concentrated way with a cohort of small businesses to help them get to the next level. Could that be the next increment of 20, 30, 40,000 jobs in our marketplace? I think the short and simple answer is absolutely. And we're starting to talk about that as part of our economic development strategy.
Very strategic. I like how strategic that is. Certainly, businesses thrive on the success of others to just ultimately grow as a whole. So thank you for that. So in an effort to encourage businesses to move their offices downtown, Deluxe, I believe it's Deluxe Corporation, the check processing company, they recently received $1 million grant from the city of Minneapolis to help build out their space at 801 Marquette. Can you share a little bit of insight about where this funding came from and if this type of funding is available to other large employers? As a commercial real estate broker, I think that's important for other large businesses to know about, and if that might be available to future businesses that are considering Minneapolis.
Yeah, so first of all, absolutely delighted that Deluxe is going to continue to call Minnesota home, and I think that's a really important thing to highlight because that was not a foregone conclusion. I mean, Deluxe is a Fortune 1000 company. It grew up in Shoreview in my hometown. And as it started to think about its evolution as a business and its future needs, it had every opportunity around the country and the globe to relocate. In fact, invested in a significant kind of R&D tech center in Atlanta, Georgia, which was, as I understand, a contender for their corporate headquarters as well. So we should celebrate retaining Deluxe in the Minneapolis-St.Paul marketplace. It's not every day that a Fortune 1000 company relocates to a major downtown. So we are thrilled that that they made that decision and made that investment in our region, in our state, and in our city. So the $1 million that you're talking about came through the state of Minnesota. So it's through the Minnesota Investment Fund, through the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And that is a fund, that and the Job Creation Fund, that is accessible for companies that are looking to relocate here or to be retained here. It's tied to some job growth metrics and some other metrics with regards to a 5 to 10 year period. So it was a competitive grant process that Deluxe had to go through and make some, again, commitments to the city of Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota. Also notably, had to have the city of Shoreview sign off on that investment because it was an interregional move. So the mayor of Shoreview graciously said, We understand that Deluxe's business needs have changed. We see an opportunity to revitalize the campus that had been there for decades, and we're going to help support Deluxe's move within the state of Minnesota. We see that fairly often. A company in downtown Minneapolis just recently announced that it's going to do a similar move out to Bloomington, and the mayor of Minneapolis had to send a letter saying, we are excited that this company has decided to stay within our region and within our state. So these funds are available and accessible, and I would encourage folks who are thinking about staying here, growing here, or moving here to leverage every single bit of resource that is available. And I'm always happy to have a conversation with folks who are interested in doing that.
Fantastic. That sounds like something I need to do some more research on for my clients. That's an incredible resource, one that needs to be tapped in as often as possible, especially for the large organizations that are reviewing all their options. So let's see here. I think that covers the majority of our questions. I do have one last question, and that is one that I think that will be simple for you to answer. And that is, what do you like most about Minneapolis? If there's one thing you could summarize when you think about Minneapolis and you think about the great place you get to work for, what is the one thing that pops in your mind?
The challenge here, Laura, is there's 100 things that pop into my mind, but I will pick one. The thing that I love most is that I can be, from my desk at 9th and Nicollet in downtown Minneapolis to the middle of a lake in July in about 12 minutes. And I would challenge you to find anywhere across the country where that is the case. Just this connection that we have to nature and that access is remarkable. It's a part of the reason that people love this place and commit to this place and call this place home.
Absolutely. It is a beautiful place to live, and I'm happy to live here too. Absolutely. We live surrounded by lakes, and we wouldn't want it any other way. Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'll be sure to put your contact information within the newsletter if anyone has any questions or follow-up information that someone would like to receive from you. And thank you again. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.